top front tooth has begun to erupt. But pediatric and other dentists have told me, and as well as parents of children of that where their the top front teeth, the baby teeth have fallen out, and how long does it take for the adult tooth to come in? That can take 6 to 12 months to actually fully come in. It's slow. It is if that is a if that tooth is a top left central incisor, then the couple of days before when the tooth had just erupted, a couple of days before, I found Adam's last best friend who last saw him maybe a week or two before, as he said, a week or two before he disappeared, and he still had neither top front tooth. So I think that front tooth came in roughly a week before he disappeared, and then he's gone for 2 weeks. Then they find the head. The medical examiner had said for the newspapers that Adam looked like he was dead for maybe all the time that he had been gone, those 2 weeks, and the tooth is in too far. I have Hollywood police crime scene pictures that show a buck tooth. There are other pictures I have seen and had described for me where that tooth is in the words of a forensic anthropologist at University of Florida who took his own pictures for Hollywood PD as from the skull, all the skin is cleaned. It's in almost all the way. That does not make sense. That's in too far for it to be Adam Walsh. And the visual ID is based on that there's a new tooth, not that the child looked like Adam Walsh. Child is age appropriate. The child is somewhere between 6 and 7 and 8, something like that. So that's not very far off. And the child has a filling on the lower left molar that's on the cheek side. So how rare is that? I make a point sometimes of asking younger people, do you have any cavities? No. Where do you have cavities? Oh, I have my molars, my lower molars. It is a very common place for cavities. In fact, it's where most of the cavities that kids get are on the lower molars. There you'd be upper molars too, but the lower molars. So that in itself isn't really that good. Is it? Now, how about on the cheek side? Is that unusual? One forensic dentist who I've talked to said that 98% of all the fillings that he's done for kids on those lower molars are on the cheek side. Now, a second forensic dentist said, well, not that many. It's really not as common as that. Okay, so this is what's called a presumptive identification, not a positive identification, which is what it was written down as. This is really kind of like a presumptive. But the problem is that if that top front tooth, if that is a central incisor, then that can't be Adam Walsh. So that's where I have photos and I have the explanations and the little bit of description that comes from the guy who did the identification, who says that there's one tooth missing, one central incisor missing, the other one is just in. This is a slapdash identification, and I'm telling you that there is a very likely chance the identification is wrong. In other words, it's not Adam Walsh. Mm-hmm. Did you follow any of that?
Yeah, and there's two things here. Number one, the police and the medical examiner, whatever you want to call it, the different people involved there. There seems to be a connection here, and it seems to be the connection is that they're trying to race their way through this thing without actually considering all the facts.
Very good. excellent. It does seem that. And now the community was nuts when the kid was first reported missing, and for the 2 weeks that everybody was searching for him. And then this was a nice kid from the suburbs, who mom left at Sears, she said, for just a couple of minutes in the toy and the video game department, and that made everybody in the community with the child, especially of similar age, just completely crazed. And we have a child abductor, in our midst, and we don't have any clues to who it is. Are they still here? Are they going to grab my child next? Then they find a child's head, in a canal, 100+ miles north, and one of two things happened. Either, well, that's Adam. That's the way they wrote it up as. We found Adam Walsh. Adam Walsh found dead. Or it's a second child, and now we don't know who that child is. We're still looking for Adam Walsh, and it would seem like there's some kind of serial something or other going on, and that makes a nuts situation. Remember, Hollywood is, especially then, was a tourist town. This is July and August, and people are starting to book their winter vacations.
So you've just given us the motivation for why they are, possible motivation, or speculation for possible motivation. See, because I was going to ask you, actually, what's their motivation for rushing through this thing, aside from trying to please the people who are involved? But, that all makes sense, too.
You want to settle you want to have the feeling that you're being protected by the police and the rest of the institutions down here. So maybe this guy will go away. It's sort of like, the bombing in Paris. I mean, maybe there just won't be another one.
And see, now, one of the things that I was obviously checking into was to see what their reaction was to your articles, the things that you had brought up, all the sources, all those things, and they all seem kind of brush it off. And there's no validity to that, but there's never been any kind of justifiable response, and that's where I'm always like, okay, so have they tried to ever, and you don't have to name names, or you can name names, it's completely up to you, have they tried to discredit you because of the fact that you're, quite frankly, making them look bad, but they did that on their own?
John Walsh, the only instance of that was John Walsh personally. John Walsh, when I put the story out at the end of 2006, and then it hit television. It was Christmas, so it didn't hit until the beginning of the new year. And then initially he was interested because Walsh had pushed the state attorney to go get Dahmer interviewed in Milwaukee, and the police were not anxious to do that, but Walsh got that done. So there's a transcript of an hour interview with Dahmer in the file. So Walsh had written a letter that said, it's very possible that, Dahmer, who is a pedophile, he used that word, might have taken my son, and, there's two good witnesses, there were only two at the time, who said they saw him. So they're like, go and investigate it. So when my story first hits television, and then it quickly spreads to CNN, and all the other places, he puts out a statement like, the state attorney really needs to investigate this. And then a couple short days later, it's, the Hollywood police thoroughly investigated, Mr. Harris's claims and found them totally, unfounded. And then something like, Mr. Harris should, consider being more responsible in the future. And that's the only instance of anybody going after me in any kind of way. Otherwise they've largely just left me out of it. They certainly haven't challenged me on any point.
when I listen to you, you bring up all these points, and they're great points. And not once have I heard a definite from you. And that, see, I think that's telling. I haven't heard you say, well, it was absolutely Dahmer. No, you're just throwing out speculation. But the problem is that they haven't thrown out much speculation with facts behind it on the other side. So I'm curious from your side of things. And again, we're talking speculation. I mean, if you could throw out a percentage at this point as to how sure you are, number one, that it was Adam Walsh or not Adam Walsh, and number two, that Dahmer may have been responsible for his murder or disappearance.
I think it's overwhelming that Dahmer is responsible for the kidnapping of Adam, and for the longest time I said the murder of Adam, and now I back off on that part, and that the identification of Adam is slapdash. That's really absolute. That if there was ever a trial, which there has never been, 34 years later, for the murder of Adam Walsh, the state would have a great deal of difficulty proving the first point of the case, which is that somebody murdered Adam Walsh. Here's the proof that Adam Walsh was murdered. The identification of. You don't have. They're missing. Among the documents besides the autopsy report, the dental chart that was used is missing from the files of the three agencies that handled it. There were never any dental X-rays that were in evidence or asked for it. That would have been definitive. It could have seen that filling was the same as the one that was done by Adam's dentist. That would have been definitive. Then forget it. Or definitive that it wasn't. There's no X-rays. All these things are essential materials that are in every file, need to be in every file, especially when there's a dental identification, and it's strictly that. And then you can't, how do you explain that they're not there? And apparently never were there. There was a forensic dentist available in Indian River County. He was never called. There were forensic dentists in Dade and Broward counties, including the most famous one of all at the time and still, and he was never called. So even after the initial slapdash ID, the guy who did the autopsy was a major league medical examiner, and he knew the guy who had he had worked with that forensic dentist on the Ted Bundy case in 1979, which is the famous bite mark case. So they knew each other's phone numbers. So nobody is consulted on this. Why? Why are the autopsy photos gone? If they were ever taken, and how were they not taken? What is the problem here? And I say that what answers that question is, given all the other evidence, is that the identification of the child as Adam Walsh is overwhelmingly wrong. It's very unlikely. It may be Adam, but I don't think you can prove it.
Can you tell me what the official status of the case is down there? You may have kind of touched
on closed.
It.
It is no. The police closed it 7 years ago, and it's not. That's closed is closed.
Do they have an official reason for that?
Maybe it doesn't matter anymore to whomever. And I have this is not 2 months of research I did on this. This is I hate to say it. This is 15 years of stuff. This is years and years of following this and collecting all the materials, and then following up the players and continuing to ask for public records and that was a struggle, and I prevailed in almost all of my requests.